Ohio State heading off to Happy Valley, and we are joined now by our Happy Valley warrior, Kyle Rowland from the Toledo Blade. And Kyle, Buckeyes relatively healthy. The one major concern, Chris Olave, although we heard from Garrett Wilson today, he's super confident Chris Olave will be ready to go. We'll find out for sure on Friday. But for Penn State, it's a much different story. They've got some bad news at the running back position now.
Yeah, very shorthanded. They already had their starter out, Journey Brown, one of the better running backs in the Big Ten. Now one of the backups is out. Not a position that they want to be shorthanded at coming in to a game against Ohio State. And I know there's a little, quibbles with Ohio State's defense last week. It was largely very good, I thought, especially the final three quarters. They also had a defensive touchdown. Don't forget that. So I just think there's all kinds of issues for Penn State going into this game. Number one, they're probably not going to be overly confident after what happened on Saturday in Indiana. So it'll be interesting. This is the first Ohio State-Penn State game, and it seems like forever that doesn't feel like it has these massive stakes and that it's going to go down to the wire and be a classic game.
So you're not buying Ryan Day saying Indiana really, Penn State dominated Indiana. I think you referred to it as a Lou Holtz performance by Ryan Day talking about Penn State earlier today.
Yeah, I wasn't a big believer in that, and I caught some flack on Twitter from Penn State fans saying, look at this stats, blah, blah, blah. It's like, dude, you guys lost the game, first of all. Like, the fact that you're trying to brag about stats in a game you lost to Indiana tells me all I need to know. But yeah, I watched large portions of that game after Ohio State finished, saw some of the highlights. I saw the stats. The stats aren't completely horrible for Penn State, but they were a sloppy mess. And I know part of it was the unusual offseason, and it's your first game against a conference team instead of, a MAC school. Sorry to my friends in the MAC. But that's just how it works. I was not overly impressed by Penn State, and I think they've got major problems going into this Ohio State game.
No Journey Brown. And that brings up a point that we've got some great names in the running back rooms throughout the Big Ten, but no Journey Brown. But we do have Master Teague and perhaps a third running back in the Ohio State rotation, Steel Chambers, as Steel Chambers showed a little bit something towards the end of the game against Nebraska. And maybe we're going to start seeing a third running back in that rotation for the Buckeyes.
Yeah, I think he should be there. I know it was only one game, but we know how hyped he was, and he showed some things in the spring game, if I'm not mistaken, a couple years ago. I don't know. I kind of think Master Teague might go from first string to third string. He just wasn't himself. I didn't think he wasn't the guy we saw last year. Obviously, I think part of that.
Face it, we didn't see much out of Master Teague the second half of last season. He was very good the beginning half of the season, but he certainly did not pick it up when J.K. Dobbins had to leave against Clemson in the national championship semifinal game. So I'm not entirely sold on Master Teague. We saw glimpses in that backup role against J.K. when J.K. Dobbins was the star last year, but I thought we'd see more of Trey Sermon this year, to tell you the truth.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I thought Sermon showed some stuff. I really think he's the best guy they have. And going back to Steel Chambers, he deserves more carries. I think he earned that from what he showed. It was pretty much the same offensive line out there and the same defense out there. And I don't know, looked like a lot of energy from him. He was able to hit the hole and kind of make things happen. So I think you got to give him some carries maybe in the first quarter this week against Penn State.
Among the interesting things we discussed on Tuesday with Ohio State players during the Zoom availability, Josh Myers revealed that there were games last year where Justin Fields, when he would run the ball, there'd be a pileup on top of Justin Fields. And according to Josh Myers, there were some shenanigans going on. Things were being done to Justin Fields at the bottom of the pile, and that the offensive line is making an effort this year to not allow that to happen. As soon as Fields goes down, they're going right for that pile to get guys off of him. Against Nebraska, there was some elements of headhunting, some people thought, some of those targeting calls. And let's face it, the Ohio State-Penn State, it is a rivalry. You can downplay it as much as you want, say Michigan's the only rival for Ohio State. The fact of the matter is, on the field, it's a rivalry. And I think that's something we have to watch out for is if there's going to be maybe some shenanigans at the bottom of the pile when Justin Fields inevitably runs the ball.
Yeah, it's definitely kind of as old as the game itself. I mean, doesn't mean it's right, but that stuff certainly happens, and it often happens with the star players on teams. Um, the Nebraska stuff I thought was really interesting. I mean, I highly doubt that they're taught to do some of the things they did, but I mean, there were way too many instances of dirty, semi-dirty plays last week for it to just be a coincidence. I mean, I did not think that was a good look for the Cornhuskers. The emotions will definitely be running high with this week's game at Penn State. Even with no fans in the stadium, I still think it'll be just a titanic clash. I mean, these two teams, obviously, there's some dislike and animosity, and it just comes from them being competitive and so good. And the East, pretty much only runs through Columbus and State College these days. So I'm sure maybe early on you might see some penalties or whatever, but I'm sure they'll settle down and get into the game.
One of the inspiring storylines that came out of the win over Nebraska was the play of defensive tackle Garrett Haskell. And he is an individual that in late August was shot in the face, bullet went through both cheeks. He did not want to get into the details of what happened to that incident. There are reports that he was a third party acting as trying to be a peacemaker in that situation. But regardless of what happened, the fact is he was shot in late August, and here we are late October, and he was the defensive player of the game for the Buckeyes.
Yeah, it was 8 weeks to the day. Shot in the face, 5 teeth missing, on a liquid diet as a defensive lineman. I mean, it's just a remarkable story, pretty inspirational. As you mentioned, he didn't want to get too much into the details. I don't know if that's because it's still kind of a pending investigation or case, or just kind of the trauma of it. I probably wouldn't want to relive it either. But it's definitely an unbelievable story. And aside from how good of a story it is, just of him getting through that and recovering, it's big for Ohio State because defensive tackle is not a deep position at all. He was on the field for about half the snaps. I think it was 23 of 58 defensive snaps. And he caused some pressure. And even on plays where he didn't make tackles, he kind of steered the ball carrier, the quarterback, into a defender's arms. The play after his sack, he actually contributed to Josh Proctor getting a sack. So he definitely made a difference. It's big for Ohio State. I thought it was fascinating that 6 days after the incident happened, bandages stitched up, he was in the Woody Hayes Athletic Center working on technique with Larry Johnson. So that just kind of tells you how dedicated this guy is. And the teammates definitely happy he was there. I mean, it's cliche, the whole brotherhood thing or whatever, but like it's really, really true with Ohio State. I mean, what Urban Meyer and Ryan Day have done and the culture they built with these teams is really something else.
Haskell, Garrett, an inspiring story. 20 years ago, the beginning of what has become an inspiring story happened when Penn State and Ohio State met on the gridiron in Columbus. A story that you've been working on for quite some time that will be in the Blade coming up this Thursday.
Yeah, Adam Califaro. It's amazing that it's been 20 years. I mean, it seems like it was just yesterday. I was actually a young kid back then, and that play happened like right in front of me, and it's just kind of always stuck with me. But the amazing thing about it is obviously his subsequent recovery. Was given a 3% chance of walking again. That December, he walked out of a rehab facility in Pennsylvania, and a few months later, he was walking on his own. And Ohio State's medical staff has basically been given most of, if not all, the credit for him walking again. I mean, you just got instantaneous care. Anyone who's been down at Ohio State before knows. I mean, the hospital. I mean, the shadow of it is like literally on the stadium. So it was just right there. And 57 minutes after he went down on the field, he was already getting care at the Wexner Medical Center. It's just remarkable all the way around. I talked to Califaro for a long, long time. Just a great guy. And he's talked about, how much he loves Ohio State and he roots for them anytime they're not playing Penn State. And his best friend is actually Tony Johnson, who's Larry Johnson's son, the Ohio State defensive line coach. So there's that connection. But he's still in contact with nurses and doctors. And it was really cool kind of talking to all the people that were involved in his recovery.
And I think that speaks to the rivalry between Ohio State and Penn State, the fact that they will knock heads together on Saturdays, but there's a deep respect there because I think when you look at it fundamentally, Ohio State and Penn State are extremely similar, and when you are that similar, that's why you find those little tiny things and pick those apart and hate each other. I think it's kind of like that Pittsburgh and Cleveland dynamic. They're so similar to each other. That's why they hate each other so much, because there is so much respect there. Yeah,
and I think it's a Midwest thing too. I mean, people will argue if state colleges in the Midwest, maybe it's not, but they're in the Big Ten, which is a Midwest conference. I don't know. People are just more friendly. Not that people in the South aren't, but like, I don't think Alabama and Auburn like each other or really respect each other like Ohio State and Michigan do, or Ohio State, Penn State. Like, yeah, they dislike each other on the field and their fans go after each other, but there is definitely a mutual respect. And I think you need that aspect too in all great rivalries. It just can't be, 100% hatred.
The old cliche is the biggest improvement in football comes between week 1 and week 2. What are the things Ohio State has to improve this week as they take on Penn State?
Yeah, I mean, this year it might be between week 3 and week 4. I mean, if you hear Ryan Day today, and I actually wanted to ask him that question, and I got usurped by, I forget who it was, but just, you didn't have the normal offseason. You didn't have a spring at all. How far behind are you? And he said about 2 weeks. So, I mean, I thought it was interesting to just kind of get that answer. Number one, the thing they don't need to improve was penalties. I mean, they were only penalized 3 times. I was totally stunned by that. I thought teams would have a ton of penalties these first few weeks. So they definitely need to keep that to a minimum against Penn State. I mean, the run game needs to improve. It wasn't as bad as it's being made out to be, but it certainly wasn't great, and it wasn't at the level that they needed to be in games like against a Penn State opponent. I don't know. I mean, defensively, don't let the team, start quick. I think that'd be a big thing this week, especially. I know it's not the normal home game for Penn State, but I don't think you want to get down, immediately in a game like this. So I don't think there's a ton of stuff to shore up. I thought the linebackers were a weak spot last week. But all in all, especially offensively, I mean, Ohio State's just a juggernaut. So I think they could play a similar game to last week, and they would be just fine.
All right, I want to thank you very much, Kyle Rowland from the Toledo Blade. Of course, you can read his articles both online and in the print editions of the Blade.